The air in the Chiricahua foothills was thin and carried the scent of creosote and distant rain. It was the kind of evening where shadows grew teeth and the wind whispered old warnings. Elon, a woman of the Apache people, finished securing the last of her herbs in the woven basket on her back. Her hands, capable and scarred from a life of work, moved with a calm certainty. To the three men watching from the scrub oak, she was just an Indian woman, alone, a target of opportunity. They didn't see the careful way her eyes tracked the flight of a hawk, or how she paused, listening to the sudden silence of the crickets. They saw only what they wanted to see. As they rushed her, a crude sack in hand, Elon didn't scream. She fought with a fierce, silent grace that surprised them, her nails finding flesh, her feet striking shins. But their weight and numbers overpowered her. As the rough cloth descended over her head, the last thing she felt was the cold bite of a revolver's barrel against her ribs. The last clear thought in her mind was not of fear, but of a single name, carried on the wind: Catherine. The man called Harlan Stroud threw her into the bed of their wagon like a sack of grain. "Easy money, boys," he chuckled, his voice rough from tobacco and meanness. "The Indian agent at Fort Griffith pays a bounty for recovered hostiles to put back on the reservation. $20 a head." His companions, younger and duller-eyed, laughed with him. They didn't notice the particular pattern of her moccasin's beadwork, or the silver conchas holding her woven belt, a piece that spoke of a history far from this territory. To them, all Apache were the same. As the wagon lurched into motion, Elon lay still, her mind sharpening in the dark. She counted turns, felt the incline of the land, listened to the change in the horses' gait as they moved from soft earth to the harder, rutted track that led to the fort. The men bragged about their cleverness, unaware they had just become the quarry. Fort Griffith was a scab on the landscape, a collection of bleached buildings surrounded by a palisade of sharpened logs. The Indian agent, a man named Fletcher, had eyes the color of a stale pond and a smile that never reached them. He came out to the wagon, a ledger book under his arm. "One only?" he asked, peering at the bound figure. "She put up a fight," Harlan said, pointing to a scratch on his cheek. Fletcher shrugged, uninterested. He counted out $20 in worn coins. As his men led Elon away to the holding shed, a dark, airless structure smelling of despair and old sweat, Fletcher glanced at her once more. Something in her posture, the unwavering straightness of her spine despite her bonds, gave him a faint prickle of unease. He dismissed it, just another Apache woman. The shed door closed with a final thud, plunging her into near darkness. In the corner, a young mother, cradling a whimpering child, shrank back. Elon worked her wrists against the ropes, not with panic, but with a steady, determined rhythm. Her thoughts were already far from this place, traveling the miles of desert and mountain to a small, well-kept ranch house nestled in a high, hidden valley. The ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from a place of peace. In the stone hearth, a low fire crackled. A woman sat in a worn leather chair, cleaning a Winchester rifle with a practiced, loving hand. This was Catherine. The years had etched lines at the corners of her eyes, but her gaze was as clear and sharp as the day she'd left Georgia behind forever. The hands that disassembled the rifle were slender but strong, marked by sun and labor. A knock at the door, timid and urgent, broke her focus. It was Little Hawk, a boy of 12 from the nearby Apache camp, his breath coming in gasps. He spoke in a mixture of Apache and English, his eyes wide. Riders had come at dusk. They had taken Elon. Catherine did not startle. She did not cry out. She simply placed the clean barrel of the Winchester back into its stock with a soft, definitive click. The sound echoed in the silent room. She stood, and her entire being seemed to change. The gentle rancher faded, and someone else looked out from behind her eyes, someone the world had once called the ghost of Gila Canyon. She loaded the rifle, then took down a second, older weapon from above the mantel, a pair of Colt single-action Army revolvers, their grips worn smooth by use. She slid them into a well-oiled gun belt, the leather soft as butter. "Saddle the bay mare, Little Hawk," she said, her voice low and calm, "and take the roan for yourself. We ride to Fort Griffith." The bay mare ate up the miles through the moonlit night, a creature of shadow and wind. Catherine rode, not with the frantic haste of panic, but with the terrifying, steady purpose of a force of nature. Little Hawk struggled to keep pace, watching the straight, unmoving line of her back. He had heard stories from the elders, whispers of the white woman who fought like a wounded mountain lion, who could shoot the eye out of an eagle at 200 yards, who had turned the tide in a long-ago battle against the Comanche. He had never quite believed them, seeing only the woman who traded sugar for his mother's baskets and healed their sick ponies. Now, seeing her face in the moonlight, he believed. They stopped only once, at a lonely crossroads marked by a lightning-blasted juniper tree. Here, Catherine dismounted and scraped at the earth with her boot heel. She uncovered a small, oilskin-wrapped package. From it, she took a single badge, tarnished silver, and pinned it inside her coat. A U.S. Marshal star, from a life she thought she'd buried. She looked at the fort, a faint smudge of light on the horizon. The men who had taken Elon were likely drunk by now, boasting of their easy $20. They had no idea that their actions had summoned a legend. They had taken the wrong Apache woman, and by dawn, a legendary gunslinger would be waiting at the fence. The first gray light of dawn found Catherine standing just outside rifle range of Fort Griffith's main gate. She was a silhouette against the pale sky, her duster coat hanging still in the cool air. The bay mare was ground-tied a distance behind her, and Little Hawk was hidden in a wash with the horses, under strict orders to watch and not interfere. She had chosen her spot with a sniper's eye, a slight rise that gave her a clear view of the gate and the parade ground beyond, with the cover of a large, weathered boulder at her back. In her hands was the Winchester, its butt plate resting in the dirt. She waited with an infinite patience, as still as the mountain stone itself. This was not the anxious waiting of an attacker, but the calm, poised waiting of a reckoning. Inside the fort, life began to stir. A soldier stumbled out of the barracks to slop water on his face. A cook's fire sent a thin trail of smoke into the sky. In a holding shed, Elon sat with her back to the wall. She had not slept. She had worked a rope on her wrists until it was loose enough to slip free, but she kept her hands behind her, waiting. She had heard the change in the night's sounds, the distant, familiar call of a nighthawk that did not belong in this place. It was a signal, one she and Catherine had devised long ago. A flicker of warmth cut through the cold dread in her stomach. She was not alone. Harlan Stroud and his two companions, Clem and the younger one called Jed, emerged from the makeshift bunkhouse they'd been allowed to use, blinking in the morning light. Their pockets were lighter from a night of cheap whiskey and card games, but their moods were high. $20 for an hour's mean work was a fortune to men like them. They planned to have breakfast at the mess, then maybe see if the agent had any other jobs that needed doing. They sauntered across the dusty yard, laughing too loudly, utterly blind to the figure on her rise. Catherine watched them through the rifle's sights. She let the crosshair rest on Harlan's chest, then on Clem's, then on Jed's. She took a slow breath, let half of it out, and her finger rested beside the trigger. But she did not fire. This was not about an ambush. This was about declaration. She lowered the rifle, took a single step forward into full view, and called out. Her voice, amplified by the morning stillness and the cup of the land, cut across the fort like a whip crack. Fletcher, bring out the woman you took last night. Do it now, and no one needs to get hurt. The effect was instantaneous. The soldier at the well froze, his bucket half drawn. The cook peered out from his tent. Up in the watchtower, a sentry fumbled with his rifle, squinting at the lone woman. Harlan, Clem, and Jed stopped dead, their laughter dying in their throats. They turned, hands drifting toward their own sidearms. Harlan sneered, seeing just a woman, alone. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted back. Catherine didn't answer him. Her eyes were on the agent's office. The door opened, and Fletcher stepped out, buttoning his vest, his face a mask of annoyed confusion. He saw Catherine, and the prickle of unease he'd felt the night before returned, colder and sharper. There was something in her stance, in the effortless way she held that rifle, that spoke of a world of violence he only administered from behind a desk. "This is a United States military post, madam," he called, his voice trying for authority, but finding only bluster. "You are trespassing. State your business." "You have a woman in your shed," Catherine replied, her voice carrying without a shout. "Her name is Elon. You will release her to me. You have 5 minutes." Harlan snorted. "Or what? You gonna shoot us all, lady?" He took a step forward, his hand now firmly on the grip of his revolver. Clem and Jed fanned out slightly beside him, following his lead. Catherine's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time, Harlan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Her eyes were like river stone, smooth and utterly unforgiving. "You're Harlan Stroud," she said, not asking. "You took her. You have 4.5 minutes." The public challenge, the use of his name, it stripped away his bravado, replacing it with a hot, prickling anger. No one made a fool of Harlan Stroud. "Why you meddling in this, anyway?" he spat. "She just a squaw. Bounty's legal. She is my family," Catherine said, and the words fell into the dust like a vow. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Fletcher, calculating, saw a way out. A distraction. He nodded almost imperceptibly to Harlan. A fight out here, away from the buildings, would solve his problem. He could report an unfortunate incident with a deranged settler. Harlan saw the nod. He went for his gun. It was a clumsy draw, the move of a bully used to intimidating the unarmed. He never cleared leather. The report of the Winchester was a single, flat crack that echoed off the barracks wall. A spray of dust kicked up at Harlan's feet, the bullet striking the ground between his boots. He yelped, jumping back as if stung. "The next one takes your knee," Catherine said, the rifle already levered, a fresh round in the chamber, the barrel never wavering. "Let the woman go." Panic and rage warred in Harlan's face. Clem, smarter or more cowardly than his friend, slowly raised his hands. Jed just stood paralyzed. The fort's commander, a Captain Evans, now emerged from his quarters, buckling his sword belt, his face thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" "Fletcher, explain." Fletcher scrambled toward the captain, speaking in low, urgent tones, pointing at Catherine, then at the shed. Catherine watched it all, a statue of resolve. Her world had narrowed to the gate, the shed, and the 3 men in the yard. She knew the soldiers were mobilizing, that soon rifles would be pointing from the watchtower and the barracks windows. Time was a thread, fraying fast. She needed to get Elon out before the fort became an armed camp she could not breach. And she needed to do it without starting a war. All eyes were on the confrontation in the yard. No one was watching the holding shed. Inside, Elon heard the shot. It was her signal. With a quick, fluid motion, she slipped her hands from the loosened ropes. The young mother in the corner stared, hope dawning in her eyes. Elon put a finger to her lips. She moved to the door, not to the heavy lock, but to the window, a narrow, barred opening high on the wall. The bars were set in rotten wood. From her hair, she pulled a long, sharpened bone pick, worn smooth from use. She set to work, not on the iron, but on the crumbling wood holding it in place. Outside, the voices rose in argument. She worked faster. Captain Evans strode into the center of the yard, his glare dividing between Catherine on the rise and Fletcher cowering beside him. "You," he barked at Catherine. "You have discharged a weapon on a federal installation. Lower your rifle immediately and submit to arrest." Catherine's voice remained preternaturally calm. "Captain, your Indian agent, Fletcher, has illegally imprisoned a peaceful woman for bounty. I am here to secure her release. Once she is free and clear, I will gladly discuss the matter of the discharged round." "Illegal," Fletcher squeaked. "The bounty is authorized." She was a hostile, off-reservation. She was gathering medicine herbs less than 10 miles from her home, which is on land deeded to me by the territorial governor, Catherine countered, her eyes never leaving the captain. "Check your own maps, Captain. The Valley of Two Pines is private property. She is not a hostile. She is a victim of kidnapping by those 3 men, aided by your agent." The captain hesitated. He was a career soldier, weary of the desert and the moral murk of the Indian problem. He distrusted Fletcher's oily efficiency and despised bounty hunters like Stroud. But his duty was to the fort to order. "That is a matter for a judge," he said, though with less force. "Not for vigilante justice at my gate. Stand down." "There are no judges out here, Captain," Catherine said. "Only the law we carry." With her left hand, she slowly opened her duster, revealing the U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to her vest. A ripple went through the soldiers. A marshal changed things, even a retired one. Fletcher's eyes widened in genuine fear now. "She's lying. She's no marshal. She's just some crazy squaw lover." Harlan saw his opportunity slipping away. A legal fight in a court was not his kind of fight. His kind of fight was here now in the dirt. While the captain was distracted by the badge, while Catherine's focus was on the officer, Harlan made his second and final mistake. He drew his gun, this time cleanly, aiming not at Catherine, but at the lock on the holding shed door. "If you want her, lady," he yelled, "you can have her dead." It was a brutal, stupid play meant to force chaos. He never fired. Catherine's rifle spoke again. This time, the bullet did not strike the dirt. It took Harlan's revolver in a shower of sparks and shattered metal, the impact spinning him around with a cry of pain, clutching his bleeding hand. The shot was impossible, a feat of marksmanship that left the watching soldiers in stunned silence. In that silence, another sound broke, a crack of splintering wood from the shed. The rotten window frame gave way, and the iron bars clattered to the ground outside. Elon's face appeared at the opening. She hauled herself up with wiry strength and dropped to the ground, landing in a crouch behind the shed, out of sight of the yard. Chaos, genuine and unstoppable, erupted. "Prisoner escape," a soldier shouted. Clem, seeing his chance in the confusion, went for his gun. A shot rang out, not from Catherine, but from the watchtower, where a nervous sentry had fired at what he thought was the escaping prisoner. The bullet sparked off the shed's metal roof. Captain Evans bellowed, "Hold your fire! Damn you all, hold your fire!" Catherine was moving. She dropped the rifle, knowing she couldn't cover the distance with it. She drew both Colts as she ran in a low, weaving sprint toward the fort's fence, not toward the gate, but toward a section near the shed where the posts were older, weaker. Gunfire popped, wild, undisciplined shots from Clem and Jed, who were now shooting at everything and nothing. Soldiers scrambled for cover, unsure of who the enemy was. Elon, hearing Catherine's running footsteps, darted from behind the shed, a shadow flowing along the fence line. Their eyes met across 50 yards of open, deadly ground. A bullet kicked up dirt between them. Catherine didn't break stride. She fired her left-hand Colt, not at a person, but at the top of a nearby water barrel, sending a geyser of water into the path of Jed, who slipped and fell. Her right-hand pistol pointed at Clem, who froze, staring down the twin barrels of death. "Elon now!" Catherine roared. Elon reached the weak point in the fence. From the other side, Catherine fired 2 precise shots into the wooden post at ground level. It splintered. Elon threw her weight against the weathered planks. They gave way with a groan, creating a narrow gap. "Get to the horses," Catherine ordered, her back to Elon, her Colts now covering the entire yard, a one-woman army holding back the tide. Captain Evans was trying to regain control, but his men were caught in the crossfire of their own panic and the bounty hunter's wild shooting. Fletcher had vanished, fleeing back into his office. Elon slipped through the fence. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate. She ran for the wash where Little Hawk waited, knowing that Catherine's survival depended on her own escape. Catherine began to back toward the break in the fence, her eyes scanning, her pistol steady. The moment stretched, thin as a razor's edge. Clem made a twitch, and Catherine's right-hand gun barked. The shot knocked his hat from his head, and he dropped to the ground, sobbing. The message was clear. The next one would not miss. She backed through the fence. In the distance, she heard the welcome sound of hooves, Elon and Little Hawk riding hard. She turned and ran for the bay mare, who stood steady amidst the distant thunder. She holstered one Colt, grabbed the saddle horn, and swung up in a single, fluid motion. She spurred the mare, and they became a streak across the desert, away from Fort Griffith, leaving behind a yard full of stunned men, broken wood, and a legend that had just been rewritten in gun smoke and defiance. The bay mare's lungs worked like bellows. Her coat lathered as she carried Catherine across the broken land. They rode not in blind flight, but with a punishing, deliberate speed toward the labyrinth of canyons to the north. Catherine glanced back only once, her sharp eyes picking out the tiny figures spilling from the fort's gate. The captain would have to give chase now. His authority had been shattered in his own yard. But they were on cavalry horses, big and well-fed, but not bred for this rough, rising country. The mare was. She caught up to Elon and Little Hawk at the prearranged spot, a dry waterfall where the canyon split. Elon sat astride the roan, her face streaked with dust, but her eyes fierce and alive. No words passed between the two women. A nod, a look that carried volumes of relief and understanding was enough. "They are coming," Catherine said, dismounting to let the mare blow. "But they don't know the stone the way we do." "The captain, he will come himself," Elon said, checking the roan's girth. "He must save face. But he's not a bad man, only a proud one." "Then we'll have to humble him gently," Catherine replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She pulled the Winchester from its scabbard. "Little Hawk, you take the horses up the East Fork. Follow the creek bed until it ends. Then, wait at the cave of the red pictographs. Do not light a fire. Do not come back." The boy wanted to argue, to stay and fight, but the look in Catherine's eyes brooked no debate. He was their future. He had to be safe. He gathered the reins and led the horses into the narrow, scrub-choked crack in the canyon wall, soon disappearing from view. Catherine and Elon turned to the main canyon. They did not run. They began to work. Elon scouted ahead, her eyes reading the ground like a book, finding the loose stones, the subtle bends where the sound would carry. Catherine followed, using her knife to cut thin, strong branches from a stand of oak, shaping them with swift, sure strokes. They were not preparing for a last stand. They were preparing a lesson. Captain Evans led 20 men into the mouth of the canyon 2 hours later. His face was set in a grim mask. He had left a furious Fletcher and a wounded Harlan Stroud behind, with orders to lock up the other 2 bounty hunters. This was no longer about a prisoner. It was about order, about the flag, about a woman who had made the United States Army look like fools in front of their own flagpole. His guide was an aging Apache scout named Goya, who worked for the fort but whose eyes held a deep, unreadable reserve. "They are here, Captain," Goya said softly, pointing to the clear tracks of 2 people leading into the canyon. The woman on the mare and the one they took. "Can we run them down?" Evans asked. Goya looked at the high, winding walls of sandstone, at the fallen boulders big as houses, at the 1,000 hiding places. "In here, Captain, they are not running. They are waiting." He did not sound afraid for them. He sounded cautious for the soldiers. They pushed on. The canyon narrowed. The air grew still and hot. The only sounds were the clink of bit and spur and the nervous snort of the horses. Then, from up ahead or on a blind curve, a voice called out, echoing strangely off the rock. It was Catherine's. "That's far enough, Captain Evans. You're in a shooting gallery now. Turn your men around." "Even signo the halt." His lieutenant muttered, "It's a bluff, sir. They're 2 women." Before Evans could respond, a shot rang out. Not the crack of a rifle, but the deeper thwump of something else. A soldier 10 yards ahead yelped as his canteen was torn from his saddle by an arrow that seemed to materialize from the very rock, shattering it. It was a warning shot of a different kind. The next one finds flesh. Elon's voice now, coming from a completely different direction, high and to the left. "We do not wish to kill your soldiers, Captain, but we will." Goya shifted in his saddle. "She speaks truth, Captain. This is a bad place." Evans felt the trap closing. His column was strung out in the narrow defile, perfect targets for snipers above. "Madam," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady, "you are compounding a felony. Surrender now, and I promise you a fair trial." Catherine's laugh was soft, but carried clearly. "A trial with Fletcher as a witness? With Stroud? We both know how that ends, Captain. Yeah, my terms. Leave this canyon. Leave us in peace. Fletcher's bounty scheme is over. That is the price for your men's safety today." It was an impossible ultimatum. He couldn't negotiate with civilians under threat of arms. But, looking at his young soldiers' faces, pale under their hat brims, he also couldn't order a charge into certain death. He was caught. "Sir," his lieutenant whispered urgently, "we could pull back, send for a howitzer, blast them out, and be the man who used artillery on 2 women. Evans hissed back, his pride warring with his conscience. He looked at Goya. The old scout's face was impassive, but he gave the slightest shake of his head. "No." Another sound, a low rumble from up the canyon. It grew, becoming a roar. The soldiers' horses skittered nervously. Around the bend, a wall of dust appeared, and with it, a tumbling cascade of rocks and debris triggered from above. It wasn't a deadly avalanche, but a deliberate, terrifying barrier crashing down to block the canyon ahead completely. They were not just trapped. They were being shown the futility of their pursuit. "That is our final word, Captain," Catherine called. "The way behind you is still open. We will be gone. Tell your superiors whatever you must. But if you follow, the next rocks will not land in front of you." It was a masterful display of psychological warfare. They had demonstrated superior positioning, unseen mobility, and control of the very terrain. They had offered a face-saving exit. Captain Evans, a practical man at heart, saw the truth. He had lost the moment the first shot rang out in his yard. To continue was vanity, and would get good men killed for a corrupt agent's bounty scheme. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat but in acceptance. Fall back, he ordered, his voice hollow. By column, retreat. As his men turned their relieved horses, a single, final shot echoed through the canyon. Evans flinched, but it was a clean, sharp report aimed at the sky. A gesture of farewell, or perhaps a final punctuation mark. Goya, riding at the rear, looked up at the canyon rim. For a fleeting second, he saw two silhouettes against the brilliant blue sky. Then, they were gone, like spirits returning to the stone. A slow, deep respect settled in the old scout's chest. They had not just won a skirmish. They had rewritten the rules of the game. The cave of the red pictographs was cool and silent, smelling of ancient dust and dry moss. Faint figures of men and antelope, painted by hands long turned to dust, danced in the flickering light of a single, carefully shielded candle. Little Hawk had the horses picketed deep inside, their soft chewing the only sound. When Catherine and Elon slipped into the cave's entrance, he jumped up, his face a map of worry that melted into overwhelming relief. He didn't speak, just hurried to take their weapons and bring them water from a skin. The two women sat, their backs against the cool stone, the adrenaline of the day seeping away to be replaced by a profound weariness. For a long time, they simply sat in the companionable silence that only exists between those who have faced death together. They shared a strip of dried venison, passing it back and forth without ceremony. "The captain will not follow," Catherine said finally, her voice rough with dust and fatigue. "He's a proud man, but not a fool. His report will say we escaped into impregnable country and were lost. He'll blame Fletcher for provoking the incident." Elon nodded, gazing at the ancient paintings. "Fletcher will be gone before the week is out. Men like him, their courage is only in other people's suffering. When it turns back on them, they run." She paused, then looked at Catherine, her dark eyes serious. "You show the badge. You brought the past into the sunlight." Catherine unpinned the tarnished star and turned it over in her hands. "I had to. It was the only language they understand in that world. The only thing that gave the captain a reason to pause." She looked at Elon. "I'm sorry it took that. I'm sorry they ever laid a hand on you." Elon reached over and placed her hand over Catherine's. "You came. That is the only story that matters." She gestured to the pictographs. "Our grandmothers' grandmothers painted their stories here. Of hunts, of battles, of journeys. Our story is now part of this place too. The story of the day the soldiers learned that some women are not to be taken." A soft smile touched Catherine's lips. "They took the wrong Apache woman." "They did," Elon agreed. "And by dawn, a legendary gunslinger was waiting." She said it not with awe, but with a deep, abiding affection. The legend was not a separate thing from the woman she knew. It was a tool she had used, a part of her history, like the scar on her own palm from a long-ago knife fight. They rested through the night, and the next day, letting the horses recover, letting the world forget them. Little Hawk stood watch at the cave mouth, feeling the weight of his new role. He had been a messenger, then a scout, now a guardian. He was learning that strength was not just in fighting, but in the choices made before and after. On the second evening, as the sunset painted the canyon walls in shades of fire, they prepared to leave. They would not return directly to the ranch at Two Pines. It was too exposed now. They would go deeper into the Apache lands, to the camp of Elon's people, where they would be welcomed and sheltered. The ranch could wait. Their safety and the lesson that had been delivered was more important. As they mounted up, Catherine took one last look at the cave, at the ancient stories watching over them. She felt a chapter closing, not with a bang, but with the quiet certainty of a door being shut. The gunslinger, summoned in a moment of desperate need, could now retreat. The rancher, the healer, the partner, those were the selves the future needed. They rode out single file, Elon leading, then Little Hawk, with Catherine taking a rear. They moved like shadows through the twilight, leaving no trace. Behind them, Fort Griffith was already a memory, a place of foolish men and a lesson learned. Ahead was home, in all its forms. The desert night swallowed them, and the only sound was the whisper of hooves on sand, a quiet testament to a bond that had been forged in fire and proven, once again, unbreakable. They had not just survived. They had reminded the world that some lines should never be crossed, and that behind a quiet Apache woman gathering herbs, there might just be a legend, waiting patiently at the fence.